It's a great pleasure for me to introduce the first speaker of that panel, which is Vera Metcalf. She's the director of the Eskimo Walrus Commission in Nome. This commission represents 19 coastal Alaska communities, and it promotes community involvement in research projects, documenting local traditional ecological knowledge, and resource management practices concerning the Pacific walrus. Vera actually, in contrast to many of us who once in a while go into the Arctic and do our studies, she has a first-hand look because she grew up there and lives there. She was born and raised on the St. Lawrence Island in Alaska and still lives in Alaska. And she's a strong advocate for the subsistence lifestyles of Alaska Native peoples. And she's really passionate, as you will see from her presentation, about strengthening Alaska Native languages and cultures. So please come to the podium and start your presentation. Please welcome Vera.
Well, good afternoon. It's wonderful to be back in New York. Actually, I was here last year when Peter invited me to be part of another panel. But it took a while to get here. I left Anchorage actually yesterday afternoon and came here very early. But I want to thank Peter for inviting me and for Edward for the very warm welcome. I hope to share some information on my experiences and the work that I do from the ground level. I do work with walrus and walrus hunting communities from Barrow down to Bristol Bay. So we cover a very large area in Alaska. But I looked at the title of this, The Once and Future Arctic, and I also looked at the two questions that Peter wanted us to cover. And the Arctic is incredibly going through a lot of climatic changes right now. If you look at this picture, Nome is right there, and this is my home, St. Lawrence Island. Savunga is right in the middle, and Gamble is the other small community, and we're very close to Russia, and there's the Bering Strait, the international Bering Strait date line here that is increasing in vessel traffic right now. But we are very reliant on marine mammals, like seals, and when they're available to us. Right now, our communities are just about done with whaling out on St. Lawrence Island. We harvested one in Savunga. That was about a 40-something footer, and two in Gamble. One was harvested by a very young man, about 60-footer, 57, 60-footer, and the age is estimated to be over 200 years old. This bowhead whale had lots of gray, which means that it was very, very old, but a young man harvested. So can you imagine a whale living that long? Must have seen so many things in the waters and the changes and everything else, but it's amazing how long these animals live. But of course the Arctic is changing, and they're taking place among our peoples and impacting our communities. It almost as very significant to when the Arctic was first colonized and when we were discovered by the Yankee whaling. But our communities, we continue to rely on terrestrial and marine resources. Here's a young man that is on a small skiff looking for either walrus or seals in near St. Lawrence Island. But one of our captains, Arnold Galaga from Savunga, once said to me, "We're still here, we're doing what we have been doing for centuries. But this, our cycles move into spring. Right now it's spring hunting. out on the island. And many of these changes are including less sea ice. This was just taken last month by one of our hunters out in Gamble. Normally that beach would be covered in ice, but it's very early and there's hardly any shore ice, which is very difficult for our hunters, because if you harvest a bowhead whale, if you have good ice, good platform, you need to tow that large animal onto good solid ice to butcher it. But most of our coastal areas are like this right now, which is, not only posing difficulty for butchering, but safety. If you have open water, there's bound to be more severe storms and salt spray over your electrical lines, causing things to collapse. So that happened one year in Savunga, where the water was open, and storm after storm, the seawater ice spray built on our electrical lines and tore everything down, so the community was without any power for about 2 weeks. But that's what the Arctic is doing right now. It's changing dramatically. I serve on the Inuit Circumpolar Council, which is one of the permanent participants for under the Arctic Council, and we're trying to prepare our communities to emerging issues. And but the Arctic, the Inuit Circumpolar has been undertaking 5 different strategic development plans that highlight what the most important consideration for our people and communities in this time of change. They are Indigenous economic development. Food security is a big thing in all of our Arctic Indigenous communities. Indigenous knowledge and research, Indigenous language and education. Those are basically our major undertaking as ICC for ever since we, I think the Nuuk Declaration, we've been trying to follow these declarations, under the declaration, these 5 different strategic development plans. Here's another hunter hunting among good ice. They're probably looking for walrus and seals. But the reductions in sea ice and warmer temperatures are increasing vessel traffic in our waters, accessibility into the Arctic, and while some may look at these as economic opportunities for our communities, we know these same activities also threaten our food security. Increased vessel traffic will divert some of our animals, may cause our hunters to avoid these waters if a vessel is transiting through. We know that Crystal Serenity came through last year, but I think they were pretty much ready for any kind of unexpected events. So I'm not sure what their plans are, but as long as we know their transit schedules, like the Crystal Serenity, I think we can communicate that information to our hunters as they are out there in the waters. But we're also looking at willing to accept different levels of risk. Economic development must involve our interests, should be scalable and diversified enough that the risks are minimized. But this may reduce economic potential of certain development, but at the end, it is the cost of a very balanced approach. We also are very concerned about the health of our environment, the health of our animals. the health of our communities. We believe that healthy communities are including our waters, our lands, our air, our animals, our plants, our birds, our fish, our language, our culture, and identity are even more vulnerable to the many changes that are currently taking place in our communities, like climate and ecological change, oil and gas, mining development, shipping, and whatever else is heading our way. But we believe that the strategic plans of ICC provide the basis for Indigenous involvement in planning for the new Arctic. But the next question highlights, do we know how to make use of them? So the next question that I looked at was, how can scientists and decision makers work with communities to ensure that local needs are met? Perhaps the best way to offer are some thoughts and observation about what is currently happening and affecting many of our communities in the Bering Straits region. ESA, Endangered Species Act, and Pacific Walrus are currently undergoing a review process whether to list or not list Pacific Walrus as in the Endangered Species Act. We should know by September 2017 what that determination will be. But we haven't really been engaged with our federal partners, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They are trying to work with our office to go through and review all the scientific, including indigenous knowledge of walrus. But I'm sure that once a determination is made, they're going to look at habitat determination recommendations. So how do we continue to support the protection for walrus and its habitat? Not only for Alaska, this picture was taken at a workshop 2 years ago in Nome. We have to think about our partners across the waters in Chukotka, Russia. We share this resource between US and Russia, and we do think of them of what, and we do try to involve them in any of our research and traditional knowledge kind of projects. And they have a wealth of information that could be included in many of these discussions, but unfortunately, the funding is an issue, and the political situation between US and Russia really affects us in many of our ground level type of work. I mentioned indigenous knowledge. ICC uses the term indigenous knowledge. But the question we have is how indigenous knowledge can integrate more with research or policy discussions, which is often very difficult to participate in if you are an indigenous person. So fortunately, the question should no longer be if, but perhaps it is still how. How can we more fully implement the use and value of this very special knowledge? The importance isn't in the translation, but in using it to fully implement, inform, or confirm a scientific research. In other words, its value isn't it being documented or preserved, but by having indigenous experts use it to fully collect data or a research question. We know we have strengths and weaknesses, but I think when we combine indigenous knowledge with Western science, you can strengthen so much of the information from both sides. I mentioned some of the things that ICC is doing, and this focused on Inuit education improvement strategy. And if you want to have more information on it, I'm sure you can find this information on the ICC Alaska website. In December 2016, President Obama designated the Northern Bering Sea Climate Resilience Area. This is very new to us, but we hope that whatever is going to be happening, that we are involved in these discussions. It's something new to us, but we hope there'll be another way to protect the resources that are found in our waters. The other thing that we're going to be dealing with is the IUCN and UNESCO's World Marine Heritage Sites. A few weeks ago, this happened, where a select group of scientists in Monaco met and prepared a report that presents the results of scientific workshop convened to identify globally unique marine areas in the Arctic that exemplify the criteria for inscription on the UNESCO World Heritage List. Well, I haven't had a chance to read this yet, but I understand what possible impacts that might have in my region. It is an example of how others can influence and impact our communities without involving our viewpoint and input. How will this be explained to us, and are they concerned about our feedback? But I wanted to end with this quote, which one of our elders out in Gamble shared with me when we were interviewing him for some of his wonderful knowledge about walrus. To me, it's a fundamental thing that it is why we're there, and it is why we do what we have to do, and we're not going anywhere. But thank you for this opportunity, and I really appreciate your time and interest.